Evolution of Autism, Asperger's Support and Research. Before and after World War II. Before World War II, autism and related conditions, including what later became known as Asperger's syndrome, were poorly understood and often misclassified. The term autism was first used in 1911 by Swiss psychiatrist Eugen Bleuler to describe symptoms of schizophrenia, such as social withdrawal, rather than as a distinct neurodevelopmental condition. Early 20th century research was fragmented and influenced by eugenics movements, particularly in Europe. In Nazi Germany and Austria, conditions like autism were viewed through a lens of racial hygiene, with children exhibiting autistic traits labeled as feeble-minded or psychopathic and subjected to sterilization or institutionalization. Hans Asperger's 1944 paper described autistic psychopathy in children who were verbal but socially impaired, but his work was conducted amid Nazi collaboration, referring some children to euthanasia programs. Support was minimal, mostly institutional confinement, and research focused on pathology rather than intervention, with little public awareness or dedicated services. After WWII, research and support expanded dramatically, shifting toward recognition as a spectrum disorder with genetic and environmental roots, rather than parental blame. For example, the debunked refrigerator mother theory popularized by Bruno Bettelheim in the 1950s. Leo Kanner's 1943 paper in the US formalized infantile autism as a separate diagnosis, gaining traction post-war due to increased funding for child psychology amid societal disruptions like child evacuations. By the 1960s-1970s, organizations like the National Autistic Society, founded 1962 in the UK, emerged, advocating for education and community support. Diagnostic criteria evolved. For example, DSM-3 in 1980 included autism, and treatments like behavioral therapies developed. Prevalence estimates rose from near zero pre-war to 1 in 150 by 2000, reflecting better identification. WWII profoundly changed Western understanding by disrupting European research, for example, via Nazi eugenics and wartime chaos, while accelerating US-led advancements. The war's child psychology boom, studying trauma from bombings and separations, highlighted developmental differences, paving the way for autism as a neurodiverse trait rather than a defect. However, revelations of Asperger's Nazi ties in the 2010s complicated his legacy, prompting re-evaluation of autism's origins in eugenics. Did Field Marshal Montgomery have Asperger's? Historical analyses of Bernard Montgomery's biographies suggest he likely met criteria for Asperger's syndrome, now part of autism spectrum disorder. Traits included social awkwardness, literal thinking, intense focus on routines, for example, his rigid planning and disdain for small talk, and difficulties with empathy, such as insensitive remarks to subordinates. Military historian Anthony Beaver speculated on this in 2015, noting Montgomery's inability to pick up non-verbal clues. A 2000 psychiatric review concluded he fulfilled DSM-4 criteria for Asperger's disorder. These retrospective diagnoses are speculative, but substantiated by consistent biographical evidence. Autistic, Asperger's people and the draft in Allied and Axis nations. During WWII, autism was not a recognized diagnosis during WWII. Kanner's work was just emerging, so exemptions were based on broader categories like mental deficiency or psychiatric unfitness via exams. Many undiagnosed individuals served, while others were institutionalized or exempted if deemed unfit. Below is a summary table based on historical conscription policies. United States, generally exempt if deemed physically mentally unfit via selective service exams. 20% of draftees rejected for psychiatric reasons. Autism-like traits often classified as mental deficiency or psychosis. Undiagnosed could serve in non-combat roles. Exemptions documented for feeble-mindedness. United Kingdom, exempt under Schedule of Reserved Occupations or medical boards if substandard. Psychiatric rejections common. Similar to US. Evacuations highlighted developmental issues, leading to some institutional exemptions. Canada exempt via medical boards for physical or mental defects. Aligned with UK model. Limited data. Focus on able-bodied for overseas service. Australia exempt for physical unfitness or mental conditions. Manpower shortages led to some borderline cases drafted. Psychiatric exams rejected. 15%. Autism traits might fall under nervous disorders. Soviet Union minimal exemptions. Nearly all able-bodied men up to age 45 conscripted, including those with mild disabilities. Harsh policy. Disabled often sent to labor battalions or penal units, if not frontline. No specific autism data. Germany. Axis. No conscription for disabled. Targeted for euthanasia under Action T4, 1939-1941. Killing approximately 70,000 with mental, physical disabilities, including autism-like traits. Eugenics prioritized elimination over service. Survivors sterilized or confined. Japan. Axis. Exempt for physical mental unfitness. Disabled shunned as unworthy, with some used in labor but not combat. Cultural stigma. No widespread draft of disabled. Focus on pure soldierly ideal. Italy. Axis. Exempt for infirmities. Aligned with German policies but less systematic euthanasia. Limited persecution. Some disabled in auxiliary roles, but autism traits likely led to rejection. In Allies, endurance often meant hiding traits or serving in support roles. In Axis, it meant survival through concealment or institutionalization. Allied forces did not explicitly prioritize autistic individuals due to lack of diagnosis, but those with neurodivergent traits were often channeled into technical intellectual roles where pattern recognition and focus excelled. In the U.S. Army/Navy/Air Force, psychiatric screening funneled eccentric recruits to signals intelligence or engineering. The UK similarly placed them in non-social roles like radar operation or logistics. Canada's forces used similar exams, assigning to rear echelon duties. Australia prioritized manpower, so capable individuals served broadly. Soviet use was indiscriminate, often in penal units. Overall, unintentional prioritization occurred in specialized units, valuing strengths like detail orientation over social deficits. Neurodivergent individuals were pivotal at Bletchley Park, UK, where approximately 10,000 worked on Enigma decryption, shortening the war by 4 years and saving millions of lives. Alan Turing, widely speculated to be autistic. Traits, social isolation, obsessive focus, literal communication, led the team cracking Enigma's naval variant, inventing the Bomba machine. Beyond Turing, the professor types, for example, Gordon Welchman, Hugh Alexander, exhibited autistic traits like hyper-focus on puzzles. 25% of codebreakers were estimated neurodivergent. In the US, for example, Arlington Hall, similar talents aided Japanese codebreaking. Their pattern spotting and persistence were game changers, though secrecy hid contributions until the 1970s. Autistic/Asperger's during the Holocaust. Endurance, collaboration, and resistance. Under Nazi eugenics, autistic children and adults were among the first targeted, killed as life unworthy of life via Action T4, 1939-1941, and child euthanasia, murdering 10,000 children, including those with autism-like social behavioral issues, through starvation, injections, or gas. Hans Asperger collaborated, referring approximately 200 unfit children, for example, Herta Schreiber killed at age 10, to Am Spiegelgrund Clinic for murder, aligning with Nazi ideology to cure society. Up to 300,000 disabled died overall. Endurance. Survivors hid traits, for example, masking behaviors, or were protected by families and doctors. Some endured institutions with starvation abuse, later facing experiments, for example, TB vaccines. Post-war trauma persisted with harvested organs circulated in labs. Collaboration. Asperger exemplifies medical complicity. Some parents even thanked clinics post-killing. Resistance. Limited. Public protests halted adult T4 in 1941, for example, Bishop Galen's sermon, but child killings continued covertly. No documented autistic-led resistance, but allies, families, doctors hid victims. The Documentation Center of Austrian Resistance holds survivor interviews detailing brutality. Viewer discretion advised. The Nazi eugenics program grew from racial hygiene, a fusion of social Darwinism and pre-Nazi eugenics. After 1933, policy shifted from controlling reproduction to industrialized murder. Phase 1, 1933 to 1939. The law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring mandated compulsory sterilization. Genetic health courts judged cases. Appeals rarely succeeded. About 400,000 people were sterilized. Schizophrenia, epilepsy, hereditary blindness or deafness, manic depressive insanity, severe alcoholism, and the so-called feeble-minded. Phase 2, Action T4, 1939 to 1941. Hitler's backdated authorization to Philipp Buhler and to Dr. Karl Brandt. Institutions reported patients using questionnaires that measured productivity. Doctors marked a plus for death, minus for life, frequently without examination. Transports delivered victims to Grafenegg, Brandenburg, Bernburg, Hartheim, Sonnenstein, and Hadamar. Methods evolved from starvation drug overdoses to carbon monoxide gas chambers disguised as showers. Bodies were cremated. Families received falsified causes of death. Gold teeth and organs were harvested. Ashes were commingled. Children were targeted in a parallel program beginning in 1939. An estimated 5,000 to 10,000 were murdered. Many described with autism-like behaviors and labeled idiots, labeled imbeciles. Clinics such as Vienna's Am Spiegelgrund became sites of killing and experimentation. Phase 3, after August 1941. Following Bishop Clemens August von Galen's sermon and public protest, the adult program was officially halted. Yet killings continued covertly in hospitals and camps through drugs and starvation, adding roughly 200 to 230,000 more victims. T4 personnel and techniques transferred to extermination camps, accelerating the Holocaust. Roughly 300,000 disabled people were killed overall. About 200 physicians and thousands of nurses and midwives participated. Some leaders, like Brandt, were tried, many others evaded accountability. Did autistic people resist T4? Autism was not a diagnosis then, and most targets were institutionalized children or vulnerable adults. No records show autistic-led resistance. Survival depended on concealment and protection. Resistance came from allies, families who questioned death notices, a minority of staff who stalled transfers, and church leaders whose protests forced a public pause. Yet killings of children continued until 1945. Action T4 normalized bureaucratic mass murder. Its paperwork, transport systems, and gassing technology were the proving ground for genocide. Asperger's autistics in WWII resistance forces. No well-documented cases of diagnosed Asperger's autistic individuals in formal resistance, for example, French Maquis, Polish Home Army. Persecution made participation rare. Many were institutionalized or killed early. Undiagnosed neurodivergence may have contributed via intellect, for example, smuggling intel, but evidence is anecdotal. Searches yield no specifics, contrasting with allied code-breaking roles. Autistics, Asperger's in the atomic bomb project and atomic warfare. The Manhattan Project, 1942-1946, at Los Alamos, relied heavily on autistic neurodivergent scientists, whose hyper-focus and unconventional thinking accelerated bomb development. Estimated 10–20% higher autism prevalence than general population. Key figures: Leo Szilard, autistic traits, chain reaction inventor, urged Einstein's Roosevelt letter initiating project. John von Neumann, savant-level math, advanced implosion design, computing for simulations. Edward Teller, early bomb theory, later H-bomb. J. Robert Oppenheimer, director, speculated neuroatypical for visionary leadership amid social detachment. Richard Feynman, quantum electrodynamics, safe handling protocols. Enrico Fermi, autistic savant, first reactor. Klaus Fuchs, implosion expert, spied for Soviets, aiding their bomb. Albert Einstein, autistic traits, indirectly started it. Their contributions made the bomb feasible by 1945, despite ethical debates. Post-war, some, for example Oppenheimer, faced scrutiny for instability. No direct atomic warfare roles beyond development.